Have you ever overworked a painting? You want something like this, but end up with something more like this. It's not bad, but something is definitely off. Well, today I'm going to share with you my techniques for knowing when to stop and avoid overworking your paintings. Sometimes we talk about overworking a painting like it happens at the end, but there are actually a lot of things you might be doing while you're painting that are causing your painting to look overworked. So I'm going to show you an example of a painting that is not overworked, and then I'm purposefully going to overwork the same painting so you can see the difference between the two. So here, while I'm painting the sky, is a good example of when you want to avoid overworking a painting. I like to start with clean water so that everything is blending and to make as few strokes as possible. I'm also adding in the colors without lifting very much out. The more you lift out, the more you add, the more scrub marks you make, the rougher your paper looks. Also, if you add too many colors all at once or try to layer on top of each other, it can look really dark and dull. So, at a certain point, when you have the light, medium, and dark values in your sky, you want to be done and just let the watercolor dry as it will. And your clouds will usually look awesome if you leave them alone for the most part. The same thing goes with land. If the land is in the distance, you want to keep it light and airy, doing one simple stroke, maybe adding some colors while it is still wet, and then leaving it alone. And then here I'm doing kind of a grassy farm field, but I want the strokes that I'm making to not be super distinct. Sometimes when we make them too precise, like if I was making the rows for the field of this farm too exact and not leaving some of the white space, it looks overworked. Sometimes if we're doing this loose style and we're being too detailed, it looks like we tried too hard. We want that effortless look. So do the strokes, keep them simple, let them dry. Then we're going through to back to the background and we're adding some dark color, keeping it simple, not adding too many strokes, letting it bleed and blend while it's still wet, and then leaving it alone. So we have in the background our light values, mid values, and dark values, and that's when we know when to stop. So we've stopped with the sky, we have stopped with the background. Now we're going to continue to build up the values in our foreground. We know we are done with our painting when we have those light, medium, and dark values. So right now I have added some kind of shadow on the right side of these little fields. And at this point, I could be done. It's a cute little painting, but something is missing. We're missing the dramatic contrast with our darkest values. So we are going to bump up the contrast just a little bit where the background is meeting the foreground where those fields are starting with some of that dark green. You can also see I have switched to a smaller detailed brush. This is another great tip for when you want to keep things light and look less overworked because your strokes will be smaller and more on purpose. They will look it will look a lot like you meant to make that stroke instead of blobby strokes, if that makes sense. So I'm keeping the details very minimal and I waited for everything to dry before I went in and added my darker values that had the details. So there wasn't a whole lot of blending and bleeding at this stage, so we don't get the muddy colors. Muddy colors, too many layered colors, too many layered details, that will make your painting look very overworked, especially with watercolor. So we have our darker values that we have added along the background and down between our fields of wheat. And now we are going to add the detail to the kind of sections of wheat themselves. So when you're looking in real life at a wheat field, it would be very textural, but you can't add every single bit of texture with your paintbrush because it will look very busy, too textured, and very overworked. So do a little bit, it goes a long way, and then make sure you're doing darker amounts of texture and more texture in the closest parts of the wheat field, and then smaller and lighter bits of texture as everything is getting farther and farther away from you. A little bit will go a long way, and you can tell that this wheat field has a lot of texture, and we didn't have to do very many strokes. I am a sucker for adding birds to almost every landscape because it adds such great movement, but only do a few birds because I have seen landscapes where there are just way too many birds. It gets away from you, and then that also can look overworked. And then you just need to stop and walk away and call it good. You have your light, medium, and dark values, and it's beautiful and light and airy and not overworked. And now I'm going to show you the same painting and painfully overwork it because I think it's very common, especially when you're learning watercolor and you're trying not to control it. It's very common to do these mistakes and overwork it. So you'll notice with this sky, I am picking up paint that I don't want to be there. I removed some paint with a paper towel, which created a dry spot. I did try to start my painting with clean water and let everything flow, but then I just tried to control it too much and I made way too many scrub motion marks with my brush onto the paper. So the paper starts to get very textured and busy looking. The sky doesn't feel light and airy anymore. I've lost a lot of the lightness that having just the pure water color at the beginning really brings. And I'm just trying to control the watercolor instead of letting the watercolor flow and become what it wants to become, especially important when you're dealing with skies. Eventually, I let it be and I moved to the land, but I didn't start with my lightest value of color, and I also didn't wait for the sky to completely dry. So then you start to get this bleeding and blending into the sky, which is not necessarily bad, but in this painting, it doesn't really work. It doesn't do anything for us. So there's kind of this weird connection between the land and the sky that isn't working. And then I play with the color and the lightness and the darkness of the land too much. So that effortless stroke that you can get when you're just doing a simple background kind of gets lost and overworked and muddy. Then I go straight into my yellow colors, but I didn't really rinse my brush very well, so the yellow isn't a pure yellow. You can see hints of green in it. And then I, again, don't start with my lightest values. So it's starting off too dark. We're not going to be able to get very good mid values and dark values if we start too dark. And then you can see here, when I am too precise with my rows, they're too exact, perfect looking without leaving some of that jagged white space edge. It looks overworked automatically by being too precise and too detailed. So the beauty of watercolor is leaving a lot of texture, letting it do its thing, and trying not to control it so much. The more you can let go and not control it, the more it will look effortless. So now I'm going through, I'm trying to add, I'm trying to be a good student and add my mid values in the back, but again, my colors just really are not dry enough yet, and I start blending into the yellow again, and I'm making just too many marks. I'm trying to add the shadows on the right side of my wheat fields, but because I already started with midtones, these midtones look more like dark values, and it's just odd. And then I go through with my greenery. I'm trying to add in my dark tones, but nothing is dry yet. And so now we're getting too much blending, too much bleeding, and it's looking muddy almost immediately. So we have lost a lot of that light airiness between the colors. So letting everything dry before you go in and adding the details will help. Also, you can see I haven't switched to a smaller brush, so my strokes are a lot thicker and they look clumsier. And then I'm trying to add texture to the background trees, but too much texture, too much detail, too much um, movement can look so busy and overworked. And I really overdo it here in the wheat fields to really show that point for you, because our tendency, especially when we're starting out, is to paint every single detail and to do it dark so that we can see it. But when it's too much detail and it's too dark, oh my gosh, it immediately is just a mess. And again, like I said at the beginning of the video, is this a bad painting? No. Does it look like a beginner painting? Yes. And I'm trying to show you what a beginner painting versus a light and airy, more thought out painting looks like, so you can see where you might be overthinking your own paintings. Um, so I try to add in more of the detail, but you can see I'm really lost in my values. And then a lot of the time, when paintings look overworked is when people start adding glazes and more colors. So I'm thinking these wheat fields are not yellow enough, so I added a glaze of yellow over the top, which muddied everything up even more, and more green started to blend. And I'm trying to fix the trees in the back because I know they don't look good, but adding more texture is not helping them. And then I'm adding the birds, but I overdo it completely on the birds, which is fine. You can add lots of birds to your painting, but I feel like it just depends on the painting. The birds are not the focus here, so adding too many birds kind of takes away the main focus, which is the wheat fields. So this is the difference between the two. I hope that was really helpful to see how to do it the right way and what mistakes you might actually be making, because I think it really comes down to a lot of the times we are just totally overthinking it, trying to control the water instead of letting it do its thing. I'll see you all next time. Bye.